Welcome to the Ironwood Gym. Today we're going to go over kind of a little mini series that I've been doing. The first episode is how can I replace the squat? But this episode is going to focus on lifters. The first episode came out probably about a month ago and talked about basically the general fitness population that doesn't really have to squat and they don't want to squat and they want to what can they do to still get good quality lower body training in. The second episode looked at it more from the perspective of a strength and conditioning coach that is told either by the athletic trainer or by the head coach of the team that that athlete or the team cannot squat. This episode is going to take it a different direction and focus on your lifters, either your competitive lifters or that hardcore gym athlete or gym rat that just really likes to squat and really wants to squat. So first we're going to start out kind of define those different groups, and then we'll move on to what to do in the case that you're not able to squat. So your groups would be your competitive lifters, which is going to be power lifters, weightlifters, strongmen, CrossFit athletes, and then like I just mentioned, that really hardcore lifter, that gym rat that really wants to squat and views it as a necessity for his training or for his workouts. Powerlifting, there's obviously they have to squat. It is a part of their competition, so if they can, unless they're a bench only guy or a push pull guy, they really have to squat because when they go to competition, the squat is part of it. Okay, it's 1/3 of their, or it's a third of the events that they have to do. Weightlifters, you could probably make an argument that they don't have to do the back squat, which is kind of what I'm focusing on here. However, they are going to have to be in a deep front squat position to receive their clean in competition, and they're going to have to be in a deep overhead squat to receive their snatch. On top of that, the back squat for the weightlifters is really essential. It's not an absolute 1000% have to because they don't do it in competition, but it's so effective to building the rest of their training. They really need to have it as a part of their consistent part of their training. Strongmen, it kind of depends. It's a little bit different because not all strongman competitions are going to have a squat event. And I've even heard a strongman lifter or a strongman competitor say that a lot of strongmen don't like to squat because not for whatever reason, they don't necessarily all like to squat, but most of their events focus on the deadlift. They focus on carries, on different sort of lifts, rather than getting under a bar and squatting. Now you do see it sometimes in World's Strongest Man, and I'm sure it's in some of the other strongman competitions as well, but it's just not that focus of their training. But again, the back squat has such a great influence on lower body strength and even really total body strength that taking it out would not be probably a wise decision because you would be not getting the results that you wanted in some of those other exercises. CrossFit, from my understanding, I've never been to a CrossFit competition. I've watched bits and pieces here and there. You don't know what you're going to be doing when you go to competition. I have seen them do overhead squats in competition. I have seen them do cleans, have to get into a deep squat when they're receiving their clean in competition, as well as I think snatches. And my guess is at some point in time, they have the back squat in those competitions as well. So CrossFit is another one that probably can't or probably shouldn't cut it out of their training if they don't have to. And then, of course, the hardcore lifters, that just love to squat, and taking it out of their workouts or out of their training, even though they're not competitors, is something they really don't want to do because they really do love squatting or love lifting just that much. So the first thing I'm going to say here when we're talking about replacing the squat is you're not going to replace the squat. You're not going to do it. Okay. What we're going to do is we're going to provide a band-aid that can get you through times when you can't squat or when you shouldn't be squatting. Okay. And some of these band-aids, as you'll see, will involve squatting, but not necessarily placing a bar on your back, which is what I've been focusing on this mini series or whatever I've got going on right now. The number one problem you're going to have with lifters, if you're a coach of a lifter or if you're a lifter yourself, the number one problem that you're going to have when it comes to replacing the squat is getting us to stop squatting, because we don't want to. You know, myself being a former competitive powerlifter, and I guess now I'm kind of in that hardcore lifter phase that just has to be in training, and I still essentially train like I did when I was competing. But getting us to stop is going to be a problem. Okay, so my advice on that point, I got a few different points here, is one, you don't want to make the problem worse. Okay, so if you have an injury that points you in the direction of stopping squatting, you really probably do need to get away from the squat for a period of time. If the squat is aggravating the injury and constantly putting you in pain, you're going to end up making the problem worse. You have to have a vision that is long-term, not short-sighted, not focused on today's workout or this week's workouts, maybe even this month's workouts. We need to think long-term. Think in terms of years, months and years, maybe even decades, even though that's kind of hard for a lot of people to get that into their vision, but definitely months and years. Think of that. Think in those terms rather than thinking I want to squat today, because in the end, what you do today really doesn't matter. It's what you do day after day after day after week after week after week after month that builds what you're trying to achieve. It's better to sacrifice a workout or a week or 2 weeks than be forced to sacrifice 6 months or a year because you weren't smart enough to say, no, I should not be squatting right now. Okay. My next point is go see a doctor. If it's an injury that necessitates that you don't know how to handle, okay, and maybe even it's one that you do know how to handle, but you want to get some more definite answers, go see a doctor or a physical therapist. Now, what you're going to look for here is don't just go see any doctor. Don't call up your family physician and say, hey, can I get an appointment? My knee hurts or my back hurts or whatever. They're not the best person to handle this. You need to talk to someone that, if they specialize in it, that's great. But at least find someone that has experience working with athletes, or even better yet, lifters. That will be hard to find, especially the lifter part. But those doctors have a much better idea of what you're faced with when it comes to physical activity, when it comes to lifting, whether it comes to sports or whatever. Through that, they have a better idea of what the demands that are being placed on your body and what you need to do to get back to those, get back to where you want to get to. It'd be better if you found an orthopedic surgeon. Okay, they are probably the best ones to handle the normal issues that you're going to have. Certainly, there are other issues that could come up which you would not need to see an orthopedic surgeon. But from my standpoint, I feel it's best to always start with that orthopedic surgeon, and they just have more specific knowledge in the areas that most injuries are going to come from when it comes to physical activity and squatting. The next person to be a physical therapist. Again, you want to don't go to that physical therapist that specializes in geriatrics. You want to find a physical therapist that is used by maybe the athletic programs in town, or that focuses a lot of their time working with athletes or lifters. And they are out there. They may be a little bit harder to find. If you're like me, I probably have to drive somewhere to really get the quality attention that I need. By drive someone, I mean probably at least an hour away. But those two, the orthopedic surgeon or the physical therapist, they're going to be the best people to point you in the direction and really tell you what you're dealing with, and point you in the direction that you need to go to get better. Okay? And I can't emphasize that enough, how valuable their knowledge is. Okay, so now let's look at some of the injuries that you may experience or have to deal with at some point in time that would demand that you stop squatting. Okay, and keep in mind here, I'm talking about the back squat. Okay, with the bar on your back, low bar, high bar, doesn't really matter. It may make a little bit of difference in some of the injuries, but I am talking about the back squat. So some of the things I'm going to put in is squatting, but it alleviates. Well, we'll get onto that as we get to it. So let's start with upper body injuries. And generally when you think upper body, you're thinking, oh, I could still squat. But if your arm is in a sling, or if you have a cast on your arm, you may not be able to get your arm where you need to be able to back squat. So the injuries that you would face upper body wise that could limit your squatting: your shoulder injuries, elbow injuries. And there's different ways of working around some of these things. Or not always. I've had a history of pec strains, but I've always been able to squat. Okay, it's never been quite that severe. But if you have a rupture or a severe pec tear, then squatting may not be an option, because you may not be able to get your hands back to get underneath the bar properly. So what can you do in the case of these injuries? First, look at the severity. So with the elbow specifically, if it's not that severe, you may be able to just move your hands out wider on the bar, and it will alleviate the stress on that elbow, and therefore you can return to squatting. And you wouldn't even have to stop squatting. But in the event that the injury is severe enough that you cannot put your arms up there, we need to find alternatives. The first alternative I would go to would be the safety squat bar. Okay, the safety squat bar allows you to not have to put your hands back. You can have your hands down in front and hold on to the handles. And even if you can't use the one arm, if you can't put that out there, you really have to limit that one arm, you can just hold on with one arm and you're probably going to be fine. I've seen people squat with a safety squat bar without even using their hands. They just put their hands out in front or down to the side. So certainly the safety squat bar would be an option if you can still put the bar on your back and have that pressure. I've also seen athletes that, not necessarily in the lifter's realm, but this would carry over, that the athletic trainer or the medical professional still did not want any sort of pressure on that on the traps or anything on the shoulder. So in that case, the safety squat bar might not be an option. But if you can at least put the bar on your shoulders, then the safety squat bar would be my go-to. One thing I'm going to caution here is that don't get it in your head that, oh, I'm going to squat with the safety squat bar, and the safety squat bar makes all squatting better. So for the next 6 weeks, I'm going to squat with a safety squat bar, and I'm going to come out stronger in my squat. You're probably not going to do that unless it's specifically targeting weaknesses that you're really deficient in. Okay? Remember, every different type of squat is an exercise in itself. The safety squat bar is an exercise in itself, and it has skills that specifically pertain to it. So if you only safety squat bar squat, then you're going to build your safety squat bar and you'll get better there, but it won't necessarily carry over to your back squat. So it's just something to keep in mind. Don't get these high hopes that being injured, you're going to come out of it far stronger than what you were when you went in. They are different exercises. And this is really a whole different conversation which deals into special exercises and how they correlate to the main exercise. Just understand that the safety squat bar can help the squat. It's not going to build it all by itself. Okay, it's just one part of what you're trying to build. Anyway, back to the injury discussion. The next thing I would go to with upper body injuries, and I can't think of anything off the top of my head that would stop you here, if you have access to it, would be the belt squat. And I didn't include the belt squat in the discussion about athletes. It would certainly be an option, but a lot of the college weight rooms that I've seen do not have a belt squat. Okay, so that's why I didn't include it in that. If you had a belt squat at a college weight room, you could certainly use it with your athletes. But the belt squat would be a definite way that's not going to put any stress really on your upper body, and you can still get quality work squatting in. Definitely benefit the quads more than the posterior chain, but you are still squatting and getting some work done. The next option I would give is the leg press. Okay, upper body injuries, they're not going to be affected by the leg press as long as you can get those supports moved so that you can go through a good range of motion. You can get quality work in on the leg press. Does it replace the squat? No, but it does allow you to continue to work your legs in a heavy manner. Okay, so moving on now to the low back. The low back can be a little bit tricky. Some things with the low back you can continue to do, other things you cannot. Okay, so if the doctor's saying, hey, your low back is hurt, you need to stay off of squatting for the next 5 weeks. Okay, there are still some things you could try out that you might be able to do. You might be able to belt squat. I'm not saying you definitely can. I'm saying you might. It might be worth a shot. Some people can do it and some people can't. It depends on the specific injury. Where in your low back is the injury? Is it a muscular injury? Is it a disc issue? If it's a disc issue, how high or how low is it? If you can belt squat without any pain in your low back, you're fine. But if you're having pain, don't try to push it. Don't try to fight through it. Stop doing that and move on to something else. Your low back, like all injuries, but your low back is so debilitating that you don't really want to push it here. But it will continue to get worse the more you try to train on it. So you need to stop and get away from it and find other ways to train. So if you can't belt squat, you tried belt squatting, you can't do that, really the only option that I can think of here that would be sufficient would be the leg press. But even with the leg press, you want to be careful, okay? And let me back up just a second. Your doctor may say no lower body work at all. Please follow his advice instead of trying to force things. Even if you think, oh, this is gonna be safe, don't try to force it. Take the time off, do other things that you can do, and then when you can come back gradually. But moving on to the leg press, try to leg press, but be careful. The leg press can still hurt your lower back, okay? So what you want to watch out for is as you're lowering the weight and you're trying to get good range of motion, are your hips and your sacrum and your lumbar spine starting to round and curl up underneath you? If it is, you're actually placing more stress on your lower back. Either focus on keeping your hips on the bench at all times. And if you can do it just by focusing on it, that's great. The other thing would be don't go down so far, don't lower the weight so far, because generally it's the range of motion that causes your hips to curl up. Range of motion combined with a flexibility issue. So Don't try to force it. Don't try to get added range of motion. If your hips are curling off, stop the range of motion there or a little bit short of there and do your pressing from there. Now, lower body injuries. Okay. Lower body injuries are going to come probably in the form of a knee injury, a hip injury, or a muscle strain / tear, which will generally be in the quads, the hamstrings, or the groin. When you're looking at what you can do in regards to lower body injuries, you're really going to be restricted here. Okay. So the first thing that you want to assess is where, especially in terms of muscular injuries, where in the range of motion am I having the pain? Okay. If you may still be able to do things with a shorter range of motion. Just because you have a lower body injury doesn't mean you have to stop doing lower body work. If you have stuff that's in a higher range of, or in a lower, deeper range of motion in the squat, so it doesn't affect you until you're down in the hole or getting close to the hole, then you can probably still do things that don't put you in that deep position. So look at your range of motion. For example, looking at myself, and this is an injury where I'm talking about you need to stop or else you're going to make it worse. I turned a groin strain, which should have been a month and a half to get back and healthy. I turned it into 13 months because I kept trying to squat on it and it just made it worse and worse and worse. Finally, I stopped, but because I dug myself into such a hole, then it took a lot longer to rebuild and to be healthy again before I could start training. But during this injury, the one thing I found was that I could still do things at a higher range of motion. Even though I couldn't squat, I could still deadlift. I could sumo. I could pull sumo. I could pull conventional. Either one did not matter. But if I got down close to parallel on that squat, my groin felt like it was going to rip apart. So cutting out squatting actually allowed me to focus on my deadlift and really bring my deadlift up during those months where I was not squatting at all. Okay, so that was a huge benefit to me at the same time that it was a huge drawback because I was sacrificing my squat. But that's one of the first things to look at. Even though you may have a lower body injury, you still may be able to do the lower body, just not into those deep ranges of motion. If you can't do that and you do have to limit yourself, you can't do one side, you still want to train the other side. So if your right leg is injured, you still want to train your left leg even if you can't use your right. This will make coming back from the injury easier once you're able to start utilizing your right leg again. So in this case, we're going to have to turn to single leg alternatives, and there aren't very many good ones. Most single leg lower body exercises still require the use of the other leg to some extent. For example, if I'm doing a lunge, I'm only going to step out with my good leg. The problem is I'm stretching my bad leg at the time I'm stepping out with my good leg. That's not going to help you, okay? Because it's still putting pressure and it's still applying force to that bad leg, and it's going to be aggravating the injury. So you need to find exercises that really only utilize the one leg. Step ups, depends. Maybe not. You might be able to do a lower step up, but remember, when you're doing a step up, when you come down, you're putting your bad leg down. Okay, your good leg is on the box doing the step up, driving up, but when you return to the floor, it's the bad leg that's going down. So be careful with that. Depending upon what your injury is, you may be able to do it, maybe not. Muscular issues, you might be able to get away with it. Joint issues, probably not. So that might be a possibility. If you're able to do pistol squats would be an option. Except, remember, if you lose your balance and you have to put a foot down, the foot that you're going to be putting down and catching yourself on will be your bad leg. So it's definitely something I would do with a lot of caution. And actually, myself, I wouldn't even do it. But I can see where a lot of CrossFit people, maybe some weightlifters, and possibly your hardcore lifters, non-competitive hardcore lifters, might want to throw that in. Again, use caution. The one thing that I do think you could do is to do a single leg press. If you have a leg press that you can just do one side on some leg presses, depending upon the sled, it's fairly easy to do the sled with one leg only. Some leg presses, that's not as good of an option, but definitely a single leg press would only focus on the good leg and allow you to completely avoid the bad leg and not have to worry about it. So that's how to replace the squat. Again, replace the squat, because you're really not going to replace the squat. But these are some options of what you can do to work around squatting. Again, like I said, the problem is getting us to stop. But it's better to have a long-term vision, focus on your ultimate goals, not on what you're doing today. Don't sacrifice. It's better to sacrifice one workout or a week or maybe a couple weeks rather than sacrifice 6 months because you dug yourself into a hole, or sacrifice a year because you dug yourself into a hole. Make sure you go get checked out. If you need to, go get checked out by a doctor, a quality doctor, or a physical therapist that knows how to work with lifters and or athletes. And that will be it for today. Please remember, always be in the pursuit of strength.